Well, for more on US-UK economic relations, let's bring in Garret Martin. Garret is a professional lecturer at American University's School of International Service, and he's also an editor-at-large at the European Institute. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So, how would you describe the local reception to President Trump's state visit, especially since, before coming, he weighed in on Brexit and also, of course, had some choice words for London's mayor?
Well, there's certainly an element of Groundhog Day because in some respects this resembled a lot the visit last July. There was a Twitter barrage against some now familiar enemies in the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. There was also, again, some words of criticism towards Theresa May and the way that she dealt with Brexit. And we even had the Trump baby blimp back in the skies again. Now, I think one interesting difference is it seems that the protests were there, but not quite in the same numbers as last year. And I think after that initial sort of barrage on Twitter, it seems that there were less sort of drama and incidents than last year, at least.
Now, obviously, as you mentioned, this is happening against the backdrop of Brexit and now, of course, a leadership change within the Conservative Party. How specifically important is the UK-US relationship at this point in time with all this uncertainty?
Well, I think it depends for whom you're talking. I think if you're talking for the UK, I think it could be vitally important. Once the dust settles on Brexit, and who knows when that will be, we have to keep in mind that for those who argued very vociferously for Brexit, that argued that the UK would get its freedom to make these big trade deals, and of course the United States would be the main partner. So for those who are arguing that way, the US relationship is very important. For the US, I would say less so. I think the UK is one of many partners that the US is engaged with.
So what specifically do you think the UK is really looking for in terms of its future bilateral ties with the US?
Well, I think for the UK, I think it wants to be able to show that it can deliver on the promises of Brexit. Again, one of the key ideas was to free itself from the shackles of Brussels and to be able to make better trade deals. And of course, the United States is such an important market. So I think that's key for the UK and its sort of trade relations.
Now, we know that President Trump weighed in on who should lead the Conservative Party next. He picked Boris Johnson. He also said that the UK should really get tough on the EU and walk away if they don't have a good Brexit deal. What's your take on this advice? And if they do take it, how would that look for the UK economy?
Well, I think you always have to be wary of unsolicited advice, is my general opinion. I don't think necessarily Donald Trump understands the minutiae of the negotiations with the EU. I really don't think that fundamentally whoever takes up from Theresa May is going to face the same structural problems, the same sort of lack of a majority in Parliament, and also the same kind of intractable problems. I think a no deal is an option that's been put forward by some, but this would have significant and economic repercussions for the UK.
And we did see that President Trump raised some more eyebrows in talking about the so-called phenomenal trade deal that he thinks that he can have with the UK. He said everything's on the table, but he also included the publicly funded health system, the NHS, saying that that could be open to American companies. Now, there was a lot of uproar, but he did, in fact, walk back those comments. But it did raise issues about over-reliance on the US as a trade partner, as we saw with issues like Huawei, individual companies. What are your thoughts on how they should proceed with this relationship?
Well, I think, despite the promises made by Donald Trump that trade could double or triple if there was an agreement, that seems to be unlikely to be the case. Second, if you look at past precedents, these trade agreements take years and years to negotiate, and they often get bogged down on a number of contentious issues. Yes, you brought up the NHS, but even that, which I think is a non-starter across the board in the UK, there are still all the issues about food regulation, so-called chlorinated chicken problem. And you can see that that will probably be a problem whenever those negotiations start.
And so as we look at from what both sides have been saying so far, what can you glean about perhaps the pace that a deal might take?
Well, I think you always, in any case, I can remember in a different context when they were talking about TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, that was really kicked off in 2013. Voices on both sides of the Atlantic were talking optimistically of a deal by 2014. That never came to be. So despite the claims that maybe a deal could be made within a year once the UK finally leaves, I find that very hard to believe.
Now, it's interesting because Trump also had tea with Prince Charles, who's known to be a very advocate climate change activist. And we know that Trump obviously pulled the US out of the Paris Climate Accords. Any chance or any indication that there could be any progress on that front?
Oh, to be a fly on the wall during that conversation. Again, I would be surprised Trump was courted by a lot of other major leaders in the run-up to the withdrawal from Paris Accords to no avail. Despite all my respect for Prince Charles, I find it hard that he would be able to sway Donald Trump. And always keep in mind that these foreign visits for Donald Trump are also fundamentally about his base and about domestic politics.
Certainly, everyone has their own vested interest with this trip. Thank you very much. Always good to have you. Garret Martin there of American University School of International Service and an editor-at-large at the European Institute.